What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 59, and I am the host, Kyle Anzalone. A couple announcements before I get into the news today. I started a Subscribestar account. This is an alternative to Patreon, so if you're looking for a way to donate to the show and don't want to do that through Patreon, go Subscribestar and then search Conflicts of Interest. I added a new $5 tier there, and of course, I'll match that on Patreon or however else people want to give me money. If you donate $5 a month, I'll do like a members only Discord chat, and I'll hang out in there and talk with people about news or whatever else throughout the day. Also, it could be a place to like suggest news stories to cover on the show, different topics, stuff like maybe guests on the show. So if you want to support the show financially and hang out on Discord, think about donating $5 a month, Subscribestar, Patreon, or if you have another way you want me to set up to take your money, let me know and I'll certainly get that done. The other thing is I create a LBRY account. This is a YouTube alternative. Hopefully the archive of the show will be up there by the end of the week, but I'll start uploading the new episodes there with this episode, and all the future ones should be up there. So if you use that, you can now find the show there. Although I really like it when people subscribe to the show on YouTube, because the more subscribers we add there, it gets us closer to unlocking like the super chat feed, so we could do some live Q&As and fundraise some money for the show that way. So if you have a YouTube account, think about going over there and subscribing. We added quite a new few subscribers over the weekend. People really enjoyed that episode with retired Army Major Danny Sherjan on, and this guy's a West Point professor, and he's coming on the show talking about Ethiopia, the war going on there, Mali, and then looking at the Biden team coming in and what we could expect with policy and the potential for Biden to start war. So I really recommend people check out that video. I got great feedback on it, but either way, subscribe, like the show, share it from YouTube. You can also find the show at the libertarianinstitute.org, where I'm the net news editor, and I also write my daily news roundup and publish it there. The last thing I had before I get into the news today is, of course, to talk about the great sponsor of the show, Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeStore.com is where you go to get your CBD products. That is a business run by Carlos and Vanessa Ablar. At the start of this whole COVID thing, they had a storefront all set up and ready to go. The lockdowns came in and killed that business, but they kept it going with their online thing. They have a great website there where they explain about CBD, what it is, how it could help you. If you're already somebody you like your CBD product, that it helps you out. They have like lab tested results and everything like that, so you're getting consistent products. It's not sometimes it works really well and sometimes it doesn't. So that, that's one of the things I really like about the Paloma Verde products. So think about going to PalomaVerdeStore.com and using the promo code PEACE, PEACE. That's, lets them know that you came from the show, and helps to support the show. You're also supporting a great, libertarian family there, and you get yourself a little discount too when you get your products with the promo code PEACE. All right, so today is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Some people, get the day off of work or school or whatever, but really it's, supposed to be a day to reflect on the ideas and teachings and speeches of a really important American figure who, is of course most known for like leading the civil rights movement and really making a lot of progress with race relations in the United States. He preached a message of nonviolence, even when violence was acted upon him. Of course, he was, I believe, a reverend, but a preacher of some kind. A man teaching the Christian message. And so along with being those things, he was also in some ways an anti-war activist, and gave a very important speech against the Vietnam War. So I want to take a minute on the show to highlight that today. We were at antiwar.com today. This speech is the spotlight, so anybody who wants to go and read the whole speech, you're more than welcome to. And then we also have an article up there by David Bromwich talking about the importance of the speech and why this was such a important thing and critical thing for Martin Luther King Jr. to do. what I am going to do now is there's a couple, like 3 minutes of that speech that I think are just critical, and rather than trying to either read it myself and butchering it, I got a little clip here from Martin Luther King Jr. And look, this guy is one of the top orators ever. So even though there's like the recording isn't pristine, there's like a lot of background noise and some clicking. I'm sorry about that. I can't get rid of it. But the message here is just so powerful. So I'm going to be quiet for 3 minutes and play this. And for people watching on YouTube, the article will be up.
In sending them 8,000 miles to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia, which they had not found in Southwest Georgia and East Holland. So we have been repeatedly faced with the cruel irony watching Negro and white boys on TV screens as they kill and die together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together in the same schools. So we watch them in brutal solidarity, burning the huts of a poor village, but we realize that they would hardly live on the same block in Chicago. I could not be silent in the face of such cruel manipulation of the poor. My third reason moves to an even deeper level of awareness, for it grows out of my experience in the ghettos of the North over the last 3 years, especially the last 3 summers. As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. I have tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they ask, and rightly so, what about Vietnam? They ask if our home nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problem, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of the hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent. For those who ask the question, are you a civil rights leader? And thereby mean to exclude me from the movement for peace, I have this further answer. In 1957, when a group of us formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, we chose as our motto to save the soul of America. We were convinced that we could not limit our vision to certain rights for black people, but instead affirm the conviction that America would never be free or saved from itself until the descendants of its slaves were loosed completely from the shackles they still wear.
So it's one of the things that I wanted to add on, and this is in that David Bromwich article at antiwar.com, is one of the reasons that this speech was so courageous by Dr. King is that he was fairly, I guess, not supported by the administration at that time or something like that, but was like able to convey his message and maybe like had a little bit of a platform there, right? And so then speaking against the war is probably, picking a fight with somebody who, maybe extending you a little bit of an offer, but as Dr. King says, you can't like just ignore some violence and allow others to continue, and that the U.S. government is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. I definitely think that's still the case if we look at things going on in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Iran, Venezuela, North Korea. In so many of these cases, there's pretty terrible governments and actors in those countries who, do terrible things to their own countrymen But the U.S. is also killing a lot of these people, starving them to death in the most inhumane ways, and essentially staying involved in these conflicts, making sure that whatever balance can, one day, come to these regions to hopefully tame the violence. We're just injecting more and more violence into those countries and ensuring that this goes on for a longer and longer time. When I talk about a country like Yemen, right? There was this article, I think back in like the early 2010s, like maybe 2010, 11, 2012, where there's a psychiatrist who had gone to Yemen and, a remote village that has seen a lot of drone activity. And he said that a massive percentage, like 90 something percent of the kids in those villages had PTSD. Now, this isn't a real like study peer review or anything like that, but even if his numbers are only half right and only half the kids in those villages have PTSD, he's talking about when the boys hear the sound of like an air conditioner or a fan, like triggers them like a drone, and they become violent and angry and dangerous, right? And so imagine what's going to happen in that country when you have an entire generation essentially of children who have been in some way inflicted with PTSD, right? It leads to higher rates of alcoholism, other kinds of drug abuse. It increases, severe mental illness chance, major depression, suicide, even psychotic disorders. If you have PTSD at an early age, it could increase those. It increases rates of domestic violence, against spouses and children. It's something that just perpetuates violence in a society, right? And then now more kids are going to be violent because they're going to have that, the next generation. Like, this is a legacy thing that you impose on society whenever you destroy, in the way the U.S. has destroyed so many societies in the Middle East. And not that these places were bastions of democracy before, and that there's not, the Taliban, weren't great people. It's not like it was the violence of the U.S. versus what was a pristine democracy or anything like that. But at the same time, the violence of the U.S. is just perpetuating the violence and instability that some of these violent groups already had. Also, I mean, it's pretty obviously not about that, because as terrible as the Taliban are, the Saudi monarchy is far more in control of their country, and maybe some of their methods are less cruel, but they seem a hell of a lot more effective in suppressing and killing their own people. That maybe they don't do crazy. I don't know. I think there are some acid attacks in Afghanistan at some point. There's been honor killings there, backwards stuff like that. But the Saudis behead people. You know what I mean? Like, it happens with the sword, and we bat that regime, and we give them all kinds of weapons and support and stuff like that. And so it's clearly not about improving human rights or anything like that. So yeah, with that, look at some other MLK stuff, on his holiday here. But I do want to get into some other important stories that I want to talk about. This one is from The Guardian, titled "Left Stranded: U.S. Military Sonar Linked to Whale Beachings in Pacific, Say Scientists." And so there is a new study out on the Marina Island and testing area. This is kind of around Guam in the Pacific. It's, I guess, an area that's ambiguous on who is able to control that area of the Pacific, because Guam is kind of a U.S. territory, and so the U.S. is able to get away with doing some marine testing there that maybe they couldn't get away with in other parts of the world. It's near one of the deepest areas of the world. It was at the Marina Trench or something like that. That's right there that they do this. And so there's a lot of wildlife there. Marine animals, specifically whales and dolphins, are of concern here. And so Guam biologist who studied beaching since 1998 believes beachings are connected by sonar, and he's looked at 13 beachings since 2010 and has often found that there was active sonar use in the area where the beachings occurred within about a week. So in 2015, this is a particular story from the Guam biologist. Culver beak whale, which is some kind of whale, died. The U.S. military first denied using sonar in the area, but later it was like captured on some scuba divers gear, and so they were able to present it. And then the military later went and admitted that, oh yeah, we were using sonar in that area. For people watching the YouTube video, you could see a general map of the area right there now on the screen of where we're talking about here in the Pacific. So the new study was done by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. It was done on 8 stranding events, and then 3 strandings were occurred within 6 days of known sonar use. And what they think is happening is that when the sonar goes, the whales are really deep, but especially beat animals. So I guess certain whales and dolphins that have more beats than, I don't know, just a flat face, I'm not a biologist here, are more susceptible to the sonar. And the sonar, for whatever reason, encourages them to rise to the surface very quickly. And when that happens, they essentially get decompression sickness and die. And then there are 8 senators now in Guam who are looking to end active sonar use by the U.S. in that area because of these concerns. This is one kind of crazy thing that people don't realize about like U.S. warfare, or like some of the things that are kind of passively going on, like the trying to find other countries' submarines. We have all these helicopters and different kinds of ships now that use sonar, which I guess at times are basically just like blasting sound waves into the water, trying to hit a submarine to bounce back a signal to figure out where something is. Now I guess there's different kinds of sonar, and different things are less disruptive to marine life. I didn't have a time to like do a whole science lesson before doing this show, but this is something that we actually covered on antiwar.com about a year ago, an article by Morgan Hunter. And I will link to that in the show notes page. I'll try to dig it up and find it. And that way y'all can see that this has been an ongoing problem. And, if we want to wage these great power conflicts, even if, we turn the military into like this green paradise that, some people like AOC have suggested, more green powered weapons rather than just getting rid of the weapons, you're still going to have a lot of negative environmental impacts because, these military exercises just wreck wildlife and stuff like that. And here's just another example of how, you want to like do combat with North Korea and find their submarines, or China or Russia, well then you're probably going to beach and strand a whole bunch of whales trying to find those submarines. All right, the next story I have is a little bit better news, I suppose. It's not bad news at all. And that is troop levels in Iraq and Afghanistan are now at their lowest level since 2001, 2002, I guess. Well, Iraq a little bit later because that war didn't start until 2003. But those troop levels are now 2,500 in each country. They have hit a benchmark set by the U.S. To get that done by the 15th. Now, looking back at the Trump administration, this isn't good enough. This is only a 2,000 troop cut from the levels that he took over in Afghanistan, and of course he has put a lot more troops in that country. in Iraq, I think the numbers were around 5,000 when he got into office, but those numbers were kind of dubious because Congress had set a cap, but the Obama administration, blew past it to fight ISIS. But Trump certainly ramped up the war against ISIS, maybe not by sending more troops to that country, by dropping far more bombs in Raqqa, Mosul, trying to rout out ISIS in there and other areas. And so Trump was pretty aggressive, with his policies in Iraq and Afghanistan. And now people are kind of giving him credit for not being a warmonger in those countries, like compared to Bush and Obama, which is a little bit true, but not really. Airstrikes were at tops in Afghanistan, least since 2006 during his administration. He was just blowing up sites that were believed to be connected to the opium trade. It wasn't even always clear that they killed a lot of civilians in that conflict. They're saying B-52s to blow up tin shanties in the mountainsides in Afghanistan. That's how stupid Trump's war in Afghanistan was. And so it's always better to have less troops there than more, and so in a way this is good news, but it does kind of feel like the womp womp of the Trump administration, especially on his foreign policy, where he sometimes talked a good game, but it never came through. Now, looking forward, I think these are about the troop levels that Biden wants in Afghanistan. Now, I think he wants more like counterterrorism style forces, which is disturbing because the U.S. kind of bad counterterrorism forces in Afghanistan now are these crazy death squads just running around and murdering people. Scott Horton did a really good interview in the past week on that. I'll link to that in the show notes page as well for anybody who wants to look at that. But yeah, there's this like 01 group in Afghanistan that has just been committing war crimes for the past few years. It's really, really disturbing stuff. And that's the kind of thing that Trump has supported, but that's the kind of policy that Biden has said that he wants going forward. And so I don't think we're getting out of this war, even though May 1st is the date according to the agreement that Trump had negotiated with the Taliban. Let's see. I did have a note here on Afghan peace talks. Apparently they're moving fairly slowly, and that is because they're kind of waiting to see what Biden is going to come in and do. There's, I believe, a lot of talk in Washington right now about delaying that May 1st deadline for at least 6 months. And so I'm guessing that would probably greatly impact negotiations, or it could even stop them. And so from my understanding that there's now a whole lot going on in Qatar right now in talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban. Also have this article here by Jason Ditz at antiwar.com titled 13 Police Killed in Afghanistan Insider Attack. These are when, because the U.S. and Afghan government are recruiting people from the population that they're at war against. This is an insurgency. Sometimes an insurgent will join the police, get some training, get some, maybe a gun, and then turn his gun on, his enemies, because he's insurgent, a member of the Taliban or whatever, leave a whole bunch of police dead, and then allow for the looting of the weapons and ammunition. And then it's a huge win for the Taliban. So they just did another one of these attacks this past weekend. This is the warfare being carried out in Afghanistan. The Afghan government wipes a whole bunch of people out with airstrikes, and the Taliban carry out attacks like this. It doesn't seem like this war is really going to end anytime soon, and certainly not if the U.S. just keeps troops in there and helps the Afghan government bomb the Taliban, just enough to make sure they're not taking too much more territory, but essentially allowing the war to burn on at this rate. So one of the reasons I got a little bit more concerned about making some alternative social media accounts for myself is this thing I came across on Twitter. Off Guardian is a Twitter account that I think Kit Knightley does a pretty good job over there, and it was a Russiagate skeptic and a skeptic of Syria chemical weapons. So this guy's some good on some stuff, but If you're not watching on YouTube, I'll tell you what it says. So when you clicked his link, it took you to like a YouTube page that said, "Warning: This link may be off safe." Gives the URL to the link. It says the link you are trying to access has been identified by Twitter or our partners as being potentially spammy or unsafe. In accordance with Twitter's URL policy, this link could fall into any of the categories below. Malicious, and then there's 4 bullet points here, and here's the first bullet point. Malicious links that could steal personal information or harm electronic devices, spammy links that mislead people or disrupt their experience, violent or misleading conflict that could lead to real world harm. Certain categories of conflict, if posted directly on Twitter, are a violation of the Twitter rules. And then you could go to the link of Twitter rules. And then there's a big blue button that says back to previous page. And then there's another one that says ignore this warning and continue. And then you have to click continue to actually check out the article. I go to Off Guardian, so I felt comfortable going to the site and everything, but I have to imagine like 95% or so of people, this is going to turn them away. One of the disturbing things about it to me is that it's so broad on what could possibly be the reason. Spammy or violent. Those are two very different things, and to not be able to categorize it into one or the other it is kind of concerning. I don't find the Off Guardian Twitter account to post a whole lot. At least I don't see a whole lot in my feed. Maybe it's the algorithm thing and that's why or something, but I can't imagine it being spammy. Violent or misleading, he is here talking about free speech and stuff like that. And so maybe that's the issue, is that Twitter is saying that it's possibly violent or misleading conflict that could lead to real world harm, because he's, as we're going to get into the article here, talking about people, redefining free speech or looking to limit free speech. So, all right, now I'm going to get into the article. And it's titled MSN calls for a new definition of free speech. New buzzwords in the mainstream media bubble spell trouble for those outside of it. And again, Off Guardian by Kit Knightley. So he goes through here, and I had picked out a couple of the, he has said that some new mainstream media phrases are domestic terrorism, and I've talked a lot about that on the show. I'm not going to get into that again, at least not today. And then they say, a lot of people are saying that the censorship on social media isn't a free speech issue. I did want to take a second to talk about that. I don't know if my position here lines up completely with, Kit Knightley's, but I think, there's valuing free speech and then asserting that everybody has a right to free speech on every platform everywhere. I think people kind of try to conflate the two, depending on how you want to use the points. Like sometimes libertarians really don't understand, and they say being, censored on Facebook is like a violation of their First Amendment right. That's not the case. Private companies do have a right to censor who they want. Although, I am open to arguments that people make around that these really aren't private companies anymore. The government has threatened to regulate them and hauled them in front of Congress so many times. And it's been pretty clear about, you toe the line of the U.S. Foreign policy establishment and you're okay, but you start, posting stuff about maybe Russia didn't have the election or something, and then your content's problematic and you're going to get drug in front of Congress. And so there are certainly reasons to say that, these are somewhat heavily government influenced companies, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, Google. Of course, with Amazon, you always had the very interesting play is that, Amazon Web Services is one of the most important hosting companies. And then it also, is owned by the same guy that owns the Washington Post, who will offer up editorials and, news pieces on, censorship and stuff like that. It seems interesting that, they don't disclose that relationship, and it's not more obvious, between Bezos and Amazon, the Washington Post. And that's quite a group of people. So yeah, it's not necessarily, an issue of you should have the right to be on Facebook. But I do think there's an important value of free speech, and I personally am like, I guess what somebody would call like a free speech radical or something. Unless somebody is like, a direct, go murder this guy, go harm this person. You should be able to say just about anything you want. And allowing people to express their opinions, I think, is a way, the best way to actually weed out poor opinions and stuff like that. People will realize that they're wrong when you censor them. I think they tend to revert to like more echo chamber type. Like Parler was far more of a right wing echo chamber than Twitter. At least on Twitter, right wingers had to interact with people on the left, and like the people on the left sometimes made good points. Once you're in Parler, it's just an echo chamber. But Parler, I don't think, would have existed if it wasn't for the obvious Twitter censorship on the right. And so, this is kind of the hole you fall into whenever you start trying to censor speech on different platforms. There is some other pretty ugly speech out there that if people, if accounts wanted to censor, I mean, I guess, if somebody was just posting swastikas all day or something like that, I don't know, like, that's a different kind of argument than people trying to, debate and actually use words and stuff like that. But for the most part, I think that the value of free speech, even on a private company's platform, should be prioritized in almost all cases. But I think that's generally a separate issue from what a lot of people are now talking about, which is whether certain speech is so harmful that we shouldn't be able to say it, because if you say that the election was rigged, you're going to apparently enrage somebody on the right to the point that, they go and tear down the walls to the Capitol or something like that. And so we've had some recent headlines and different quotes from articles I have here in the Financial Times. I believe this was the title, "Limits of Free Speech in the Internet Era," and they have an article looking at censoring speech. The New York Times asked, "Is free speech a threat to democracy?" The Guardian said, "All free speech claims do not have equal merit. We must work to ensure harmful speech is regulated." The Conversation, which is a UK editorial paper, said the attack on the Capitol exposed the dangers of disinformation. Elements of America's free speech may no longer free speech tradition may no longer be a benefit for its purpose. And so I find these to be some pretty disturbing comments. They really do want to regulate what people are allowed to say on the internet, and looks like they are going, right towards speech that it goes against the mainstream narrative. I don't think all these ideas are right. I have expressed on the show that I am in doubt that the 2020 election, that Biden got less votes than Trump. I think Biden probably got more votes and won that election fairly, by the rules of the game that they play. You know what I mean? It's not a case of the election was stolen from Donald Trump, as Trump and a lot of his supporters have claimed. But I think the more mainstream, you let those people air out those grievances on Twitter, and then if you're able to, and if their claims are false, you debunk their claims. And I think less people end up following them that way than if they're posting it on Parler. So I think that's, again, the dangers of censorship and why we shouldn't regulate free speech here in the U.S. AOC said, and I really don't want to seem like I'm picking on this person, because occasionally she does get things right. Like, she was trying to push to get Army recruiters out of high schools. I think that would be a great thing to do. But sometimes she's just going on and says, here, we're going to have to figure out how to rein in our media environment so you can't just spew misinformation and disinformation. That that sounds pretty scary to me. If she's talking about reining in the media, the government, like reining something in, I think means arrest and fines and censorship at the government level. And look, the government gets a lot wrong. It got WMDs in Iraq wrong. It got Syrian chemical weapons wrong. It got Gaddafi committing genocides wrong. It created Al Qaeda and, created the jihadist threat essentially with its violent actions overseas. And so we have to be able to question the official narrative. And if that gets censored, then I think we're in a lot more trouble than we're in today. All right. There's one story from the Capitol that I want to talk about, and I think it's an important one because this was heavily tied to the people who are pushing that what happened on the Capitol was a coup, and that was there were some federal prosecutors who had said that there were kill capture teams at the Capitol, and so this would mean that the Capitol protesters weren't there to be disruptive or to like witness the events or something like that, but rather they were there to arrest or harm members of Congress, which takes you a little bit closer to the coup narrative than not. But they're now saying that there is no kill capture teams, and that essentially seems to be a miscommunication among federal officials that led to some of those claims being mentioned in federal, charging documents. And one person who was charged in Arizona, I guess that prosecutor is actually going to take that part out of the charging document, which makes me think that the federal government probably doesn't have any proof of this at all. And so likely completely an untrue claim. And so it's important that people know that that's not true, because if it was, it'd be significant. But if it's not, that that's important too, that people don't think that they were trying to kill and capture members of Congress. All right, some other news stories to go through here. Russia announces it will also withdraw from the Open Skies Treaty, citing the U.S. withdrawal. The U.S., I think, withdrew this fall, maybe over the summer. They had actually announced that they had been talking about for a while. John Bolton, I guess, got another essentially arms control agreement. This allowed for overflights of U.S. and Russian military bases and other member states. I think Belarus and several European states were also members of this agreement, and it allowed for the other countries to see what the U.S. or Russia's military capability is, and it prevents from too much excitement. The old missile gap thing that led the U.S. to spending a whole bunch of money building missiles we didn't need, stuff like that. So these agreements are important to monitoring. The U.S. got out of this. I guess Russia tried to stay in it with the European powers, but said that if you staying in and do an overflight of Russia, you can't share that intelligence with the U.S., which seems to be fair, because if the U.S. withdrew, doesn't allow overflights of the U.S., but then the U.S. allies do overflights of Russia and give that intelligence to the U.S. The U.S. was able to pull a pretty nifty diplomatic con with that, and kind of harm Russia in the intelligence and maintain their advantage. And so that wasn't going to happen. And so now Russia's getting out of this agreement, which I guess will completely fall apart. We have an article here by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com titled "Study: Trump-China Trade War Costs Up to 245,000 Jobs." Yeah, I mean, this was predictable. The libertarians were on it. They said the trade war was stupid, that tariffs aren't going to help the economy, and it looks like it cost the U.S. about 250,000 jobs. Who knows? This could have been in part the margin that Trump needed to win. Had these 245,000 people not lost jobs, I'm guessing a lot of them occurred in like key swing states, possibly Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, something like that. who knows? Maybe it could have been switched. The study is from the U.S. China Business Council, and they teamed up with Oxford Economics, and they also found that a moderate reduction in tariffs, so apparently not even eliminating, just a moderate reduction, could lead to an additional 145,000 U.S. jobs and an increase of U.S. GDP by 160 billion by 2025. So that sounds like a pretty good deal. More trade, more wealth, more U.S. jobs. That's all awesome. Not to mention the more of a trade relationship we build, the more pressure there's going to be on the U.S. government not to increase military pressure with China. Another thing on China I want to note is that Kelly Craft, who is the U.S. ambassador to the UN, had planned a trip to Taiwan. This would have been, I think, the third highest level U.S. visit to Taiwan. The Chinese government was strongly protesting it. That got canceled, but they say it got canceled because it's in a transition to the Biden team now, and that the State Department canceled all their planned travel. I have another anti-war piece, this one by Jason Ditz, titled IAEA, that's the UN watchdog on nuclear weapons, confirms Iran producing uranium metal for civilian use. And then the metal would be used for improved fuel rods for its research reactor. So when you look at like a nuclear program, there's a lot of things that could potentially be used for a nuclear weapon, but more often than not are used for just civilian purposes, either making medicines or energy. So a lot of times, anytime the Iranians do something that would maybe increase their ability to produce energy or enriched uranium to sell or medicines, they say, "Oh my God, Iran is closer to making a nuke." So this is another case where, again, the claim is, oh my God, Iran is making a nuke, and the IAEA has confirmed that that's not what's happening here, that this is going to be for civilian purposes. Iran has been pretty transparent since the U.S. withdrew from, even before that, but the U.S. withdrew from the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, in 2018. And since then, Iran has said, well, if, you're going to reapply sanctions, then we're going to undo some of the caps that we imposed on our own nuclear program. Because we can have more efficient energy, we can enrich uranium at a higher level that I guess, can help make more medicines and stuff like that. And so, this was laid out. This was a part of the Iran nuclear deal that Iran allowed Iran to do that. But they have been very careful to make sure that the IAEA knows what they are doing and confirming that it's just for civilian use. They're being very, very careful not to allow this to be interpreted as some sort of attempt to make nuclear weapons, in part because the Israelis are threatening to draw up strikes on Iran's nuclear program targets. Speaking of Israel, we have Israel launching major airstrikes on Iran-linked targets in Syria. I mentioned this on the show early last week with Connor Freeman, but it wasn't confirmed yet, and we really didn't know the extent of the strikes. But looks like maybe a few scores of Iranian-linked groups in Syria near Iraq were killed by Israeli airstrikes. I didn't see final numbers on it. I saw the number reported up as high as 57. This is the same general area that Israel carried out strikes in late 2019 that provoked an escalation that led, to ultimately to the U.S. assassinating Qasem Soleimani, and then the Iranians launching missiles at a Iraqi base that houses U.S. soldiers in early 2020. And so this is a very dangerous move, and Israel looks like they're really, really trying to prevent the U.S. and the Biden administration from re-entering the JCPOA. Biden has always affirmed that he has very strong support for Israel, that he wants to be Israel's friend, and so he'll be faced very early on whether he wants to get back in the Iran nuclear deal and take war with Iran off the table, or if his allegiances to Israel are more important. last thing I have up today is something in Yemen. This is a little bit of a particular point, but I think it's pretty important. And I've talked about it on the show in the past that one thing that's helped Yemen over the past several years has been there's a lot of Yemenis living abroad that send remittance back home. And in fact, the World Bank estimates that 1 in 10 people in Yemen are actually surviving on remittance, that people, family members, friends, or whatever living overseas send back home, which seems like a crazy number. Can you imagine if like 1 in 10 Americans you knew were relying on money that was sent to them by different American living in a foreign country? But now that's going to be drastically cut down because of the U.S. labeling the Houthis as a terrorist organization. So it's going to be harder for people to send money back home to Yemen, because now there's a threat that the Houthis control 70% of the Yemeni 70 to 80% of the Yemeni population. So if you live in that group, it's very possible that you'll end up being accused of violating U.S. sanctions. So that's why I have I've talked in the past couple of shows about how horrible the situation in Yemen is getting with the U.S. Designation of the Houthis as a terrorist organization. But I think that I think that this is just another sign of how bad it's going to be, and not something that I initially considered. We talked about reductions in aid and stuff on that show, but cutting remittance, which apparently is helping 10% of the Yemeni population, is going to be absolutely huge. All right, that's the show for today. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Share the show. Find it online a lot of places now. LBRY, YouTube. Support the show on Subscribestar, libertarianinstitute.org, antiwar.com, and support Paloma Verde Store and get your CBD products there. PalomaVerdeStore.com. Use the promo code PEACE. Be back with another show on Wednesday.